And lastly, let's get into Erika Kirk. And so Erika Kirk dropped a video in the aftermath of the White House Correspondents Dinner shooting, and she showed up in this all-black outfit with a black hat, and so a lot of people were making fun of her appearance. They had the Rhythm and Nation comment, and then also some people were saying that she was dressed like an assassin, which is obviously a ironic comment considering the situation that has put her in the public eye. And so obviously that video did not go over well because she was really just kind of lecturing to the public about how people were treating her in the public, the way that the press was writing stories about her, and how people were mocking her and how she's grieving and all of that stuff. And so obviously she is really struggling in the limelight. And there's one thing I want to call out specifically in her video, and this is where she's basically criticizing journalists for recording videos of what was going on in the room. And she's talking about how people were willing to record when they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know if the shooter was in the room with them, and that they could have potentially recorded their own deaths. And so that is interesting when you think about why people would have done that. And she's basically talking about how those people were not in fight or flight response, and they're just natural instinct was to record instead of thinking about their safety, right? And so I find that super interesting because we live in a culture where people say screenshot it or it didn't happen, right? And so you could say something happened, but if you don't have proof to show that it happened, people are less likely to believe you. And so with that in mind, I find it super interesting that she's basically telling people not to record. And Candace on her show, she brought up the irony of lecturing people for recording in intense situations because she pointed out that the tarot guy, who's basically like the tech guy, the camera guy, the media guy, whatever, he recorded a video of him on the hill saying, hey, they shot Charlie, he showed himself, he flips the camera around. And I think that would have been fine if he didn't show himself and was just narrating what was going on, because really it's about you capturing the moment, a record of what is happening. Right? And so that's what people are going to want to see, especially as you're trying to tell this story, because it's going to be a big story. And so the irony of this statement is that you are literally at the White House Correspondents Dinner. You're in the room with journalists. These are people whose job it is to get big stories, to get the scoop, to get the footage and all of that stuff, right? So you're in the middle of an active shooting with the president of the United States in the room. Of course you would want to get footage of what is going on, because that is literally going to be your next story, right? And so I do not blame people for recording, because you have news people, weather people who go out in the middle of storms and they record what's going on. They interview people and all of that stuff, right? You have war correspondents who are literally in the middle of a war zone trying to capture what is going on, trying to capture stories, right? They understand what should be captured, what is the big moment, what is the story, right? And so I think it's kind of ridiculous to ask people whose job it is to capture those big stories, to tell those big stories, to not record in a situation like what happened at the White House Correspondents Dinner. So when you really think about what she's saying, is she's saying that nobody in that room should have basically been recording what was going on. So I would assume that they had like bigger cameras that weren't necessarily being manned or whatever, right? So they would have had some footage of what was happening, but it wouldn't have been on people's personal cell phones. And I think that this is super important, because when you think of the Charlie Kirk shooting, you know that there's a lot of footage that people were recording on their phone. And I think for the videos that were flooding Twitter on the day that the shooting happened, I think a lot of that was from personal footage. And the big thing with the Charlie Kirk situation is that we don't have the footage from the back camera, the camera behind Charlie, right? And so if you think about nobody recording that from in front of Charlie, and all you had was their cameras and nobody had access to that, that means that very few people would have known what happened except for the people who witnessed it live, right? And so when things like that happen, you can kind of control the information that gets out and what people know about the situation, right? So imagine in that White House Correspondents Dinner, if there was no personal footage of what was happening and all you had was the big cameras that were filming, and nobody would release that footage, right? So with that in mind, how many people would believe that the shooting actually happened, right? Because all you are getting is a narrative that the shooting happened, but you don't have the proof that it happened. You don't have something that you can refer to as a record, a photograph, a video, that sort of thing, audio, right? And so I think that is important to keep in mind, because that is the culture that we live in today, where people do want that photographic evidence, they do want video, they do want audio, right? And so it's unrealistic to expect that people wouldn't record even in dangerous moments. And I think that this is super important to highlight, because you have people who get pulled over for traffic stops, and they're recording, whether it's video or audio, because they want people to know what's happening to them in the event that something does happen, and they very well understand that they could be recording their deaths, right? And so it's not that they're doing that because they're being careless with their lives or they don't understand what they're doing. They are recording for a reason, right? They're recording as proof of what happened to them, right? And I think that is super important. I don't think it's fair to discourage people from doing that. So that's my take on the beef between Candace Owens and Laura Loomer, with a little bit of Erika Kirk mixed in. Now I want yours.